How much time is too much to stay away from your parents, not knowing about their well-being, especially when they're old, battling health issues, and living alone? And what if one day you realize they've been missing for a long, unsettling period of time? Hello, true crime enthusiasts. My name is Anton, and today we're delving into a haunting case from Essex, UK. This is the story of an elderly couple, respected and cherished in their community, who vanished one day without a trace. Their sudden disappearance left a community in shock and questions lingering in the air. Stay with me as we uncover the details of this mysterious case, piece by piece. Great Baddow, a village near Chelmsford, Essex, in the southeast of England. Like any other area, it has its good and bad parts, a mix of charm and complexity. Crime rates here are considered average to decent, as long as you steer clear of certain estates. It's the kind of place where community thrives, with groups like the Southeast Essex Social Group hosting events at the Ambleside Social Club and Friends and Social Group organizing lunch get-togethers. In this village, on Pump Hill, lived John and Lois McCullough alongside their youngest daughter, Virginia. Their home was a quiet haven, but their lives were anything but ordinary. John McCullough, at 70 years old, retired from a long career as a business studies lecturer, most notably at Anglia Ruskin University. He was known as a caring, hardworking man, with a love for education, writing, golf, and snooker. He was also the kind of person who could light up a room with his jokes. But beneath his cheerful exterior, John faced significant health challenges: hypertension, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, and glaucoma. John leaned heavily on his daughter, Virginia, for care and to manage the family's finances. He trusted her completely, often giving her money and granting her full access to his accounts. Despite his struggles, John maintained a routine, meeting a close friend every Friday at the local White Horse pub. Lois, who was 71, was the heart of their home, a homemaker who poured her love into her family. Described as kind, caring, and thoughtful, she had a deep passion for history and an even deeper love for her grandchildren. They were, as many would say, the light of her life. But Lois's life wasn't without its shadows. She battled anxiety, agoraphobia, and obsessive-compulsive tendencies. Her agoraphobia kept her largely out of the public eye, making her a familiar yet elusive figure in the community. This was the McCullough family, a couple cherished by those who knew them, living a life marked by both love and struggle. But as we'll soon discover, their story takes a turn that no one could have anticipated. John and Lois McCullough lived a quiet life in their home on Pump Hill in Great Baddow. Their youngest daughter, Virginia, moved back in with them in 2018 to take on the role of caregiver as her parents' health began to decline. Despite their age, John and Lois were far from reclusive. They were well-known and well-liked in their neighborhood, actively participating in community events and maintaining warm relationships with their neighbors and even nearby store employees. Their outgoing nature made them familiar faces, the kind of couple everyone in the community seemed to know. Virginia wasn't their only child, though. She had 4 sisters, all of whom lived outside Chelmsford, Essex. Before moving in with her parents, Virginia had been working as a bartender, trying to carve out a life of her own. But as the youngest child and facing her own challenges with paranoia and autism, her parents, John and Lois, welcomed her back home with open arms. They wanted to support her in building her career, without the added pressure of living alone and working at the same time. Virginia, in turn, saw this as an opportunity to help her parents, who were both managing their own medical conditions. She decided that living with them would allow her to care for them, while also spending precious time together. Love interests were never really part of Virginia's life. Her autism often made social connections more difficult, and she was content focusing on her family and her goals. This made John and Lois even more protective of her. They saw her as their angel, someone who brought light and care into their home. They relied on Virginia heavily, especially as their health issues grew more demanding. Yet, they couldn't have been prouder of her. Virginia was a well-qualified young woman, working hard to chase her dream of becoming an artist. She cared for her parents diligently and had always avoided trouble with the law. When Virginia moved back in with her parents, she made a big decision. She left her job at the bar and shifted her focus to building a career as a web designer. Eventually, her hard work paid off. She landed a job as a web designer in Chelmsford. But Virginia's true passion lay elsewhere, in art. She dreamed of becoming an artist, a dream she pursued with unwavering determination. Despite the challenges she faced, including her autism and paranoia, Virginia was a hardworking woman, someone who refused to let setbacks define her. For John and Lois, their pride in Virginia knew no bounds. They admired her courage, her ability to build a life for herself despite the obstacles. To them, she was a testament to resilience and strength, and they couldn't have been prouder of the woman she was becoming. In the tight-knit community of Great Baddow, John and Lois McCullough were more than just neighbors. They were fixtures. Their warm, outgoing nature ensured that nearly everyone in the area knew them. And when their daughter Virginia moved in with them, it wasn't long before she too became a familiar face. Among the many people who knew the McCulloughs, two stood out. Paul Hastings, the greengrocer at the Vineyards Shopping Center, and Debbie Pollard, who ran a flower shop near the family home. John and Lois shared a special bond with these two, engaging in daily chit-chats and building a friendship that felt more like family. John, in particular, was a regular at Paul's shop, stopping by multiple times a day during his visits to the shopping center. Over time, Virginia also became part of this close-knit circle, forming her own friendships with Paul and Debbie. When John or Lois couldn't manage the errands themselves, Virginia stepped in, helping around the house and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She had become not just a caregiver, but a vital part of the community alongside her parents. For the McCullough family, life, though not without its struggles, was peaceful. Virginia was navigating challenges at her job as a web designer, while John and Lois were grappling with their declining health. Despite these hardships, the bond between the father, mother, and daughter remained strong, and they continued to live a contented life together. But then, something unusual happened. John noticed that their credit card bills were rising, even though neither he nor Lois had made any recent purchases. Concerned, Lois checked her bank account and found the same strange activity. Both were baffled and immediately alerted Virginia to the situation. Virginia, ever the dutiful daughter, quickly contacted the bank. After investigating, the bank informed them that the issue was a mistake on their end and assured the family that the money would be refunded as soon as possible. While the situation was unsettling, the McCulloughs felt a sense of relief knowing the matter would be resolved. A few weeks later, the McCullough family's financial troubles took an even more troubling turn. John discovered that a new loan had been sanctioned in his name, even though he hadn't applied for one. Alarmed, Virginia reached out to the bank once again to address the issue. The bank informed her that a fraud had been carried out on John's account, likely orchestrated by hackers or an identity theft ring. They assured the family that an investigation was underway and promised that the loan would be closed soon, without affecting their credit score. Despite the bank's reassurances, John couldn't shake the feeling of suspicion. He was convinced that someone had stolen his identity, and this was the root cause of the ongoing issues with their finances. For a family already dealing with health challenges and daily struggles, this added stress was almost too much to bear. One day in June 2019, Virginia visited the Vineyards Shopping Center to buy groceries. This was unusual, as John was typically the one who handled the shopping. When Paul Hastings, the greengrocer, saw her, he asked how she was doing and why her father hadn't come by as usual. Virginia's response left Paul stunned. She explained that her parents, John and Lois, had decided to move away from Chelmsford, relocating to Clacton, a coastal town in Essex, for a long period of time. Paul was shocked. John and Lois had never mentioned anything about moving, not even a hint during their daily conversations. Despite his surprise, Paul brushed it off, chalking it up to their personal decision. But the news didn't just unsettle Paul. It also deeply concerned the McCullough family's GP. John and Lois were both heavily reliant on medication for their chronic health conditions. The idea of them living alone in a new area, far from their support system, where no one knew about their medical needs or could lend a helping hand, seemed like an incredibly risky decision. One of their daughters, growing increasingly worried, reached out to Virginia to ask about their parents. But Virginia, just as in the dark as everyone else, had no answers. It was as if John and Lois had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind a trail of questions and unease. A few days later, on June 18, 2019, a glimmer of hope appeared. Lois reached out to one of their daughters via text message, finally breaking her silence. The message was simple but reassuring. "Your dad and I are at the seaside in Walton this week, Mom." Later that night, another message followed. "Good night, Mom." The texts were a relief, but they also raised eyebrows. Lois and John had told Virginia they were moving to Clacton, yet Walton, a seaside town just under 10 miles away, was where they now claimed to be. The change of location didn't seem like a big issue at first, but it added another layer of confusion to their already mysterious disappearance. For the family and friends who had been worrying about John and Lois, these messages provided a small sense of comfort, but they also left unanswered questions. Where were they really? And why had it taken so long for them to reach out? And then, it happened.
Good evening. The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades. We've been asking people to stay at home during this pandemic.
The COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe, and the UK went into a full lockdown. Overnight, the world changed. People were isolated in their homes, cut off from their communities, and left to navigate the uncertainty alone. For the McCullough family, the lockdown added another layer of mystery. John and Lois, who had already seemed to vanish when they moved to Clacton, were now completely unreachable. They weren't contacting their friends or neighbors in Chelmsford, not even their daughters. Years passed, and the world slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy after the pandemic. But for Virginia, life was anything but normal. She was now living alone in the family home, completely isolated from the outside world. This isolation was starkly different from her life before her parents, John and Lois, had moved to Clacton. Virginia, who had once been a caring daughter and an active member of the community, now seemed to have withdrawn entirely. The GPs who had cared for John and Lois in Chelmsford remained concerned about their well-being. They reached out to Virginia, hoping to get updates on her parents' health and safety. But Virginia, unusually uninterested, didn't engage with them. Her lack of concern baffled the doctors. It was as if she had lost all interest in her parents' well-being. A stark and unsettling contrast to the devoted daughter they had once known. As time went on, the mystery surrounding the McCullough family deepened. Virginia had been canceling John and Lois' regularly scheduled GP visits on their behalf, leaving their healthcare providers increasingly uneasy. The GP hadn't seen or heard from John and Lois in a long time. John had failed to collect his medication, and neither he nor Lois had attended their scheduled appointments. Each time the GP inquired, Virginia offered a range of excuses, but her explanations only heightened concern. While Virginia had always been a bit eccentric, the GP never imagined she would seemingly neglect her parents' well-being. This sudden shift in her behavior was alarming, and it led the GP to suspect that something was terribly wrong. His concerns became serious enough to require action. He contacted the Essex County Council's safeguarding team, which in turn contacted the Essex Police to conduct a welfare check. What began as a routine inquiry soon escalated. The police, finding enough grounds for suspicion, treated the case as a missing persons report. This prompted a deeper investigation, one that would eventually lead to a search warrant and the uncovering of secrets that had long been buried. On September 15, 2023, at 12:10 p.m., the Essex Police arrived at the McCullough family home. They knocked on the door, calling for Virginia, but there was no response. After multiple attempts to get her to answer, the officers decided to force their way inside. What they found when they entered the house was both shocking and somber.
Hello, mate.
That's right. No one in here at the moment. Hold on. The police. Got it. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Show your hands. Yeah.
Yep.
Jenny? Oh. The time is 12:12. You're under arrest on suspicion of murder against Jonathan McCulloch and Elias McCulloch. Okay.
Virginia was inside, alone. As seen from the body cam footage of the Essex police, she was arrested on the spot, suspected in the murder of her parents. But what happened next was even more startling. Immediately after her arrest, Virginia made an unbelievable confession.
Can we go in there for a second, just so I can tell you something about what's in there?
Yeah.
And then
Just tell us
the only
something.
reason I said I need to tell you something about what's upstairs on the top floor as well.
It's fine.
Yeah, okay.
Is it here okay?
Yeah.
Yes, mind your feet. Obviously,
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not that dangerous.
No, it's fine.
I know, but obviously I've got to be careful. My dad's body's in there.
Yes, it was all Virginia. She had fabricated the entire story of her parents' move from Chelmsford to Clacton, a lie designed to mask the horrifying truth. She even sent text messages to her sister, pretending to be her mother, claiming that John and Lois were living a peaceful life by the seaside. But it was all a carefully constructed facade, a charade to conceal her unspeakable actions. In reality, Virginia had killed both her father and mother, and for 4 long years, from 2019 to 2023, she lived in the same house with their decaying bodies. The question that haunts everyone is, how did she manage to hide this dark secret for so long? The loved ones who cared about John and Lois had noticed their sudden disappearance, but no one pushed hard enough to uncover the truth. The strange excuses, the missed appointments, the lack of communication, all red flags that went uninvestigated. From the body camera footage, it was clear that Virginia had been expecting the police. She knew her time was running out, but even she hadn't believed she could keep this secret buried for this long. This was Virginia's chilling reality, a daughter who betrayed her parents in the most unimaginable way, living with the consequences of her actions for years. But as the truth emerges, it leaves us with more questions than answers. But why did Virginia kill her parents? The answer lies in a web of lies and deceit that spanned her entire life. Virginia had always portrayed herself as a successful web designer, but this too was a fabrication. In reality, she had no job at all. While she had once worked as a barmaid during her time living alone, her life after moving in with her parents was built on falsehoods. Every day she would leave the house, pretending to go to work, but no one knew where she actually went. Behind the scenes, Virginia was drowning in debt, fueled by an addiction to gambling and reckless spending. She had lost a staggering £21,000 on online gambling. And to cover her tracks, she used her parents' credit cards to make purchases, blaming the charges on bank errors, hackers, or scammers. Her parents, trusting and unaware of the truth, believed her explanations. But as her debts mounted and her lies began to unravel, Virginia found herself trapped in a cycle of desperation. And Virginia knew she could no longer hide the truth from her parents. She made a horrifying decision. On the evening of June 17, 2019, Virginia prepared a deadly cocktail of prescription medications and gave it to both John and Lois. The following morning, she found her father John lifeless in his bed, a victim of the toxic mix she had administered. But her mother, Lois, was still alive. She hadn't ingested as much of the cocktail and was sitting on her bed, calmly listening to the radio. Virginia, cold and emotionless, walked downstairs, picked up a hammer, and returned to her mother's room. As Virginia stood in front of Lois, Lois asked, "What happened?" with a slight smile on her face. Without a word, Virginia launched a vicious attack, striking her mother with the hammer. Startled and frightened, Lois pleaded, "What are you doing?" But Virginia showed no mercy, ignoring her mother's cries for help. When Virginia realized Lois was still clinging to life, she walked to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and returned to finish the horrific act. She stabbed Lois 8 times in the chest, ending her life in a brutal and heartless manner. Her sisters painted a stark picture of Virginia, describing her as a compulsive liar who lied about almost every aspect of her life. She crafted an elaborate charade, carefully deceiving everyone close to her, especially her parents. To John and Lois, Virginia was their angel, a devoted daughter they trusted unconditionally, but her sisters saw her very differently. To them, she was weird, socially awkward, and deeply untrustworthy. Virginia's web of lies extended beyond her personal life. She stole money from her parents, took out loans in their names, and squandered the funds on her addictions, online gambling, and reckless shopping. By June 2019, her debt had ballooned to nearly $60,000, a crushing burden she could no longer hide. Virginia moved back in with her parents under the guise of caring for them, but instead, she exploited their trust and kindness in the worst possible way. By March 2019, she had begun contemplating killing them, claiming she felt trapped and saw no way out of her mounting problems. She meticulously planned the murders, accumulating prescription drugs and purchasing a knife to carry out the horrific acts. After the murders, Virginia continued to live in the same house with her parents' bodies for 4 long years, maintaining a chilling facade that they were still alive. She sent text messages and birthday cards to family members, impersonating her parents. She even collected their pension payments, amassing nearly £136,000 over the years. Virginia's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. She made numerous calls to the police, even inviting them into her home. In one instance, she claimed to have been attacked by intruders, an act some believe was a calculated attempt to test whether she would be caught. During her arrest, Virginia confessed to the murders without hesitation. She calmly directed officers to the bodies and murder weapons. John McCullough's body was found in a makeshift tomb Virginia had constructed in his downstairs study, made of breeze blocks and blankets. His body was wrapped in a sleeping bag and covered with 11 layers of materials. Lois McCullough's corpse was stashed in an upstairs wardrobe, hidden behind sleeping bags and duvets. She had been placed inside plastic packing material, and the wardrobe doors were taped shut and blocked with concrete blocks. Throughout the legal proceedings, Virginia appeared eerily composed, showing little emotion. At one point, she even told officers, "Cheer up, at least you've caught the bad guy." During court hearings, it was revealed that Virginia had been diagnosed with paranoia and autism, though her lawyer chose not to use these diagnoses as excuses for her actions. Neighbors described Virginia as a fairly eccentric person, an oddball who stood out in the community. She was often seen wearing a maternity dress with a fake pregnancy bump, a peculiar choice that baffled those around her. She would also give unwanted food and gifts to neighbors, small acts that seemed kind but were tinged with strangeness. Virginia's actions were driven by self-preservation and personal gain. She killed her parents to cover up her theft and continue profiting from their money. The judge presiding over her case noted that she cared more about money than humanity, an observation that underscored the depth of her moral decay. In 2023, Virginia made a startling statement to Paul Hastings, saying, "The police are after me. They think I killed my mom and dad." Hastings found the comment odd but didn't suspect her. Her eccentric nature made it easy to dismiss her remarks as another quirk. Virginia McCullough was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 36 years before she could be considered for parole, while the judge, Mr. Justice Johnson, contemplated imposing a whole life order. He ultimately opted for the minimum term, taking into account her guilty plea and cooperation during the investigation. The judge specified that McCullough would serve at least 36 years behind bars, meaning she would be in her 70s before becoming eligible for release. Even if granted parole, she would remain on license for life, with the constant threat of being recalled to prison if she violated any conditions. It was also noted that McCullough had already served some time on remand, leaving her with 34 years and 341 days remaining before she could be considered for release. The court ruled that the motive behind the crime was financial gain, as Virginia McCullough killed her parents to cover up her theft and profit from their assets. The judge emphasized that the fact the murders took place in the family home was a significant aggravating factor, adding to the gravity of the crime. Virginia's defense attempted to argue childhood emotional neglect, but the court dismissed this as irrelevant, given the murders occurred in her 30s. While the court acknowledged her mental health conditions, including autism, personality disorder, and psychosis, it ruled that these did not lessen her culpability. Her lawyer suggested that her autism might explain some of her actions, but the court countered that while it could account for her detached confession, it did not justify the killings. Virginia's guilty plea reduced her sentence by 4 years, though the court questioned the sincerity of her remorse, citing the years of deception she employed to cover up her crimes. Heart-wrenching victim impact statements were read aloud, revealing the profound devastation caused by Virginia's actions. Lois's brother, Richard Butcher, expressed his profound loss and disbelief, emphasizing the torment Virginia inflicted through her deceit. Other relatives spoke of being devastated and bereft, describing the ordeal as a living nightmare and condemning Virginia for her laziness and greed. Mr. Justice Johnson revealed chilling details during sentencing, stating that Virginia had tested drugs on her parents without their knowledge in the days leading up to the murders. He remarked, "You think more of money than you do of humanity." Referencing the murder of Lois McCullough, he said, "Her last conscious moment was the realization that you, her daughter, had launched a murderous attack on her." The judge added, "You drugged your father's drink 2 days before the murders in order to use him as a guinea pig, and you had a primary plan to use the drugs for their deaths, and you had a backup plan to use weapons if the primary plan failed." Virginia showed little emotion as she stood for sentencing, staring blankly as Mr. Justice Johnson handed down the 36-year minimum term. It was only when she listened to her police interview, recounting how she murdered her mother, that she finally began to weep. The McCullough family issued a statement expressing their devastation and heartbreak at the deaths of their parents. They remembered the happy times they had shared and said that their mom and dad are forever in their hearts, loved and missed beyond any measure. But could this tragedy have been avoided? The heartbreaking case of Virginia McCullough serves as a stark reminder of the importance of caring for our family and showing concern for our loved ones, especially when they are older, vulnerable, or facing health issues. For 4 long years, the truth about what happened to John and Lois remained hidden. A period of time that begs the question, how long can we stay disconnected from those we love? How long can we go without speaking to them, without truly knowing how they are or what is happening in their lives? This case is a painful wake-up call, a reminder that blind trust can sometimes lead to devastating consequences. It teaches us to listen to our instincts, to question suspicious behavior, and to never take things at face value when something doesn't feel right. Vigilance, communication, and genuine care for our loved ones are crucial. This tragic story underscores the need to stay connected, to check in regularly, and to act if something seems amiss. By doing so, perhaps we can prevent such heartbreak from happening again.